All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to HR Tech Talks. I'm so glad to have you here. I'm Ben Eubanks, the host, and we're going to have a good conversation today. We have not one, but two guests with Questback. We're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about inclusion. We're going to talk about equity at work. Lots of good stuff there. If you're chiming in, if you're listening in, I'd love to have you let us know. Just pop a note in the chat. If you're on YouTube, you're on LinkedIn, wherever you might be. Let us know where you're listening in from. If you're listening to this at a later date, right? We've already recorded this. It's already gone out into the ether. You're listening to it later. Chime in anyway. The rest of the people that are commenting on the episode will get that note. We'll get to see your contribution. We'll get to see your question. I'll get notified of those things. And so I just love to have you as part of this conversation, whether live or later on. Doesn't matter. We're so excited to be bringing you conversations, insights, all these amazing interviews with people. And so I'll just get out of the way. I'm going to bring on Megan Mascarello. I'm going to bring on Andrew Cox from Questback, and we're going to have a conversation. So welcome to both of you. Glad to have you here.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah,
absolutely. So just to kick us off a little bit, Megan, why don't you go first? Let us know a little about who you are and what you do.
Yes, hi. So my name is Megan McNair Mascarello. I'm the marketing director for North America here at Questback. And I'll let Andrew introduce himself and then tell you guys a little bit more about Questback and what brings us here to talk with Ben.
Awesome. Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Cox from London, in London. I'm an assessment psychologist, and what I do is I design assessments and management systems for employee research, specifically around organizational culture and diversity and inclusion.
Great. Yes, and so as Andrew was saying, guys, we are Questback, and so Questback in its entirety, we are an enterprise platform company, and we focus on experience management. And our aim is that we help organizations capture critical insights from all of their employees, customers, as well as from the market. And we believe that using experience data and cutting edge artificial intelligence technology, it enables our solutions to be able to analyze, measure, integrate, and create actionable outcomes that organizations can use to transform themselves through innovation, while also remaining competitive, profitable, and successful. And we believe that, all of this is based on being able to listen and manage both the customer and the employee experience. And it allows you to map the entire journey, also being supported by the market research, as well as our subject matter expert support with people such as Andrew Cox. So you're basically with Questback, allowing your organization to dig deep, to unearth the why and evolve your bottom line. So we are a global business, and we are in many different countries, and we have over 300 customers that we are constantly helping to enhance their experience and their bottom line as well. So that is Questback. And today specifically, we're going to be having a conversation with Ben around our culture, diversity, and inclusion offering called Culture Quest.
Yeah. Andrew, why don't you give us a little bit of insight into that piece of it, if you don't mind, because your background in assessments, your background in psychology, and even as a practitioner in the space of engagement, I'd love to hear from you. Like, why is a tool like that important? And talk about some of the factors, the facets of that, if you don't mind.
Sure. I've been involved in employee research now for the best part of 20 years. And that kind of has morphed from employee engagement through to employee experience, through to organizational cultures, and then looking at the specific areas within the culture framework. And what I've found over the years is that the terms engagement and culture and employee experience are almost interchangeable, or have become almost interchangeable. So what used to be called an employee engagement survey is now called a culture survey. They're not the same. And you have to look at culture in a very different way from how you would assess things like employee experience and employee engagement. And so we design tools which are specifically to look at organizational cultures. And by that, I mean the way people behave and what makes them behave that way. Not their experience, not what they think, not their attitudes, but their behaviors and what drives those behaviors.
Why do you think we confuse those things, or we use them interchangeably? Is it because it's easy to do? Is it because the majority of us, so my background is working in HR, so I don't have that deep psychology background like you do. So I might assume that it's okay to interchange those. I'm kind of curious because I've never heard someone phrase it that way.
Honestly, I think it's a little bit lazy, to be honest.
Ooh,
I think
throw the gauntlet down. Okay.
Yeah, well, to be honest, one of the reasons that they are very, very different is that culture operates at an unconscious level predominantly. So the reasons that people do things, whether it's individually or collectively, and it's collective behaviors that we're talking about here in terms of cultures, they are often unconscious. That doesn't mean that they're unknowable. The trick is to bring them into the consciousness so that then they can be addressed at an individual and an organizational level. But until you do that, you're fighting a losing battle, because what drives culture is usually hidden from sight. Now, one of the problems that traditionally we've had in looking at engagement is there is a perception out there, and there are plenty of websites who sort of say how complex and how unfathomable and how ethereal and unmeasurable culture is. That is simply not true, because if you think of culture as the most common definition of culture is the way we do things around here. Mm-hmm. The thing is it's actions and behaviors which tell you about cultures, and there is nothing unfathomable, unmeasurable about behaviors or actions. They can be observed, they can be measured. The trick is to understand why they have come into existence and why they are being reinforced and repeated.
I have gotten away from talking about culture in terms of like values and gotten much more focused on talking about it in terms of actual behaviors, right? You've used that word a couple of times because those are clear things. We can see them. They're external, right? And we can actually say that's the kind of behavior we're looking for or not. That's not the kind of thing that we do here, right? And I think that's one of the things, again, it's not as easy. It's not as easy as just saying, oh, we believe in, I can't think of any words right now. Any core values, like throw your number out there. We
inclusion
things, right?
Yeah. An inclusive environment where everyone can thrive.
Yes,
which is you will find on most values statements. But what does that actually mean?
Yes.
And so typically when organizations are looking to assess it, they ask questions about, okay, I can bring my whole self to work, or I can be myself at work, or something, whatever those things mean. Now, essentially, the definition of an inclusive workplace is where people do the right kinds of things, where people respond in the right kinds of ways, where people feel happy to challenge, to bring their own ideas to the table, to showcase their own individual skills and abilities, to have the confidence to say, this is me and this is what I can bring to the table. If they find themselves in a non-inclusive environment, they're much more likely to say, okay, I'm going to keep my head down, I'm going to go with the flow, I'm going to try and fit in.
Don't make eye contact, right?
And it is that reaction, that behavioral response, which in fact is a defining characteristic of an inclusive culture. And that is what you need to be measuring, the extent to which your people do those things that you want them to be doing. And when you start having those conversations, then you start identifying barriers. Mm-hmm. And when you start identifying the barriers, then you can start overcoming those in terms of the behaviors that you're exhibiting, for example, as a manager, as a leader, within teams. What can we do to actually encourage our people to be much more active in determining the agenda and influencing and changing things themselves, and not being so worried about having to fit in, but what difference can you bring to bear? Because that's the difference that we value, and that's essentially what it's about. So a lot of organizations say, okay, we want to look at our culture, and therefore and a lot of organizations have developed models of culture which essentially descriptors of everything that culture could apply to. So that's leadership, that's development, that's risk, but the reason we look at culture within organizations is not from some academic interest, it's because we want to change it in a purposeful way. And we don't ever want to change the whole thing. We want to change specific aspects of it, be it around inclusion, be it around risk, be it around innovation, or to just say we need to align our culture more closely to our vision and values or our organizational strategy. So you just need to look at specific, well-defined elements within your culture. And within that, there are a few key behaviors that you want people to do. And once you have that degree of focus, then you can really look at the behaviors and the assumptions that drive those that really matter, and you build your assessment and your management system around those specific things, not the whole lot, because that doesn't. That's when you get to the point of it being large, nebulous, and unfathomable.
Yes, boiling the ocean does not work, no matter how hard you try, and no matter how many times you try to communicate that, it doesn't work. So
absolutely,
help me out figure this piece of it, because I know people that are listening to this. We've got a couple that have chimed in: Deborah, Lawson, April. Hello, welcome. People
Hi.
that are listening to this. Lots of companies, lots of organizations say, well, we put a survey out, or we put this engagement survey or this culture survey or whatever type of survey we have. We put those things out. But how do you get from that to actually taking action on the right things, knowing which things to tackle? I know it's probably not we could spend an hour talking about just that piece of it, but talk with that a little bit, because I think that's the hard part is when you do a survey and they're like, okay, now what?
Okay. One of the biggest problems and one of the biggest mistakes organizations do is they say, okay, we've got an employee engagement survey out there. What we're going to do is we're going to apply that to the area of culture. Okay. So we're going to make assumptions about the organizational culture and where we are from that kind of tool. It only gets you so far, and in some instances is absolutely 100% misleading and or driving the wrong kinds of behaviors and outcomes. And the best example I have of this is when you're running an employee engagement survey, a agreement score or people saying that everything is fine and dandy is what you're looking for. So if you drive up your engagement scores, you can communicate those to your leadership and go, we're doing a great job here because we're engaging our people. Why do we run a survey into culture or look into culture? Because we want to change it. If everybody is telling you that everything is hunky-dory, where's the motivation for change? And if we're driving satisfaction with everything, ultimately, we're taking away that itch that needs to be scratched. And you need to involve everybody in the organization within the process of change. So there needs to be a clearly defined, shared imperative that things could be better. And this is what we need to do to make them better. So what happens when you measure cultural change, typically through an employee engagement type survey, is if you're doing a really good job of getting your people behind the change process, what you see is your scores heading south. And that's exactly what you want. But it's exactly a indicator for your leadership and those other people who'll be looking at those metrics, because you are measuring the wrong things in the wrong way. And I can't put it any plainer than that. So you need a different mechanism. You need a different way of assessing that issue, because the first thing you need to do is to get everybody behind the change process. And unless you start encouraging them to challenge the status quo and saying that things have to change and things have to be better and creating that burning platform, you ain't going to even start on the journey, let alone complete it.
Goodness. So everyone that's listening into this, if you have a question for Andrew, you've got an expert here on survey design, on assessments, on how to change behaviors. And I've got a couple more questions for Andrew. I actually got a question for Megan, though, that I want to throw your way.
Yeah.
So when someone sees Culture Quest for the first time, they see some of these tools you have, they see how much insight they can get into what's going on in the business. They can cut it by inclusion, right? By diversity, to be able to see how different populations in their organization perceive leadership or perceive the culture. What kind of response do you typically hear from people that see that for the first time?
We have, we kind of relaunched, we relaunched Culture Quest May, June of last year, specifically in the US marketplace. And since then, I can count on one hand the times that we've presented our offering and our methodology, and we've had anyone receive it negatively. And the negative feedback that we received was purely out of someone wanting to be adamant that they believe in burying their head in the sand and never acknowledging what's really happening. Outside of those one or two people, we've always gotten a very, very welcoming response. And a lot of that is due to not only, as Andrew stated, are you identifying and uncovering the why within your culture, but because our technology is able to then also make it applicable to business development, operations, innovation, and growth. So, historically, your HR, CHRO, but more specifically your D&I officer, your talent development person, they have a title and they seem like they have a lot of pull and influence. But when it comes to who's at the decision-making table, who's really pulling the strings and calling the shots, they don't have a voice and they have a lot to share. There's a lot of great insight that comes out of these engagements and these assessments. And so our technology has allowed to kind of support and enable these key influencers and decision makers to say, hey, value and this information, this data can help us be a stronger company overall, from really identifying retention issues and churn and development. And so it goes beyond just how do we have more women? How do we have more people of color? How do we have, are we covering our bases or meeting our certain goals? And we're seeing more and more now with 2020 being this year that really kind of pulled back the curtain of D&I in corporate America. People are having some really lengthy goals right now. And so it's like, how do you think you're going to grow your D&I representation from 2% to 30 in 2 years unless you have a thorough analysis of what your culture looks like and then make it applicable to how you're going to apply that to your business structure and make those improvements out beyond just trying to have inclusivity.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. So Andrew, well, I've got you here. It's not every day I get to bend the ear of someone that's got your background. You've used the word behaviors a couple of times as you're talking about changing culture, changing beliefs, getting people to do things differently. And anyone who's worked in the HR space knows that getting someone to change their behavior is one of the hardest things that we have to do. Getting them to change their mind is one thing, getting them to change their behaviors is another. What advice would you give the leaders that are listening into this if they say, hey, I'd love to do this, but my people they don't want to change. They're hard to, they don't listen to this. What advice would you give someone that's trying to make behavior change based on all both from, the academic side, the research side, just the practical hands-on experience you've had over the years of seeing these things play out?
Yeah, it's a really great question. We have to be really focused and really consistent, and we have to change consequences for people. That's one level. So the consequences of just doing things that you've always done are negative, and the consequences of doing things differently in the right kinds of way are positive. And that ultimately is the solution to making lasting change. But it needs to be made really relevant to people in their day-to-day work. So while it is something that's led from the top, it has to be something which involves everybody at every level within the organization. So part of the Questback, the Culture Quest solution is not just an assessment and a feedback process. It is online tools to encourage active participation of everybody. So that is team leaders, team members from the top to the bottom. And that's specifically around inclusive team behaviors. And so we have very clear guides on helping the teams to determine what is important to them, what are the behaviors that they should be encouraging, how can we encourage these, how can we build these into the performance management process so that we are reinforcing the kinds of behaviors that we want, and actively sanctioning, discouraging the ones that we don't, and building that into the performance management system more generally for the organization, so we can see what the managers are doing, we can see what they're doing with their teams, the activities that they're doing, more than the scores that they're achieving, because if you focus on scores, they will get the scores up by hook or by crook.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the behaviors, so we have activity monitoring on the online systems, which shows what's happening and where, and which team leaders are actively engaging in the right kinds of activities. And then we can, as I said, we can start rewarding people for doing the right kinds of things. But it's about being consistent, and it's about going for the long haul. But before you do that, you have to make everything relevant, tangible, and understandable for everybody, that this is what they need to be doing. And when you embed it in concrete behaviors, then you can start to do that, because it makes things much more understandable for people. When you say you shall do this and you shan't do that effectively. That's putting it a little bit crudely, but it's much more meaningful than saying we are going to be inclusive, for example. Because what does that mean? You have to have behavior. Yeah, you have to have specific behavioral descriptors which tell you what is required.
Yes. Well, Andrew might think one thing, Ben thinks another, and Megan thinks yet another about what that really means, about how far you're going to go, what you're going to commit to. We have different perspectives on that.
Absolutely. And part of the process is having those discussions within your team about what do we mean?
Yeah.
What effectively do we mean? And then we can agree what those standards are, and then we can hold our people, everybody accountable for that. Yeah. So that's all part of the process.
So we just got a really good question in, and the question I asked, I thought was going to be a hard one. You handled that easily. So we'll see if this one's as easy for you.
It's a tough one. Go on.
So I'm going to pop it up here on screen, and it may cover you up, Andrew. I don't know. Okay, there we go. So somebody said, we want to understand the actual sentiment of our employees towards the culture, but we're challenged by autocratic leadership. And she's looking for some advice, some input, some insight on how to deal with that.
Okay. Culture change is very difficult to achieve without the active involvement and the sponsorship of your leadership. So really, you are up against it if your leadership isn't exactly behind what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And autocratic leadership is one of the things which will stifle innovation and prevent the creation of an inclusive workplace. So if that is the situation, then you are probably looking at a longer process than just having an assessment and management process. One of the things that you really need to work on with leadership is for them to understand that this is not just a nice to have, but it is a business imperative. Mm-hmm. And having a culture that doesn't support the organizational strategic objectives means that your people are just simply pulling in the wrong direction. And if you can help them to pull in the right direction, that is a very good starting place for building a more effective business. And unfortunately, many leaders have the view that culture is, like I said, one of these ethereal, woolly, fluffy things that, it's HR speak, but doesn't really make a big difference to the bottom line. Couldn't disagree more. So you need to work on your leadership, essentially, first and foremost.
And you can even, if I can add, one of the best places to start is by, educating your leadership, whether it's just sharing different articles, because as I said, this is top of mind, and this is something that business leaders either can continue to ignore, but they will be left behind, or they are being forced to address. And so being able to build that business case to show, hey, this is how our culture healthy or not is impacting our business, as well as being able to speak to, the governance, risk, and compliance aspect of things. Are we going to be more at risk if we don't start taking this seriously, and if we don't start implementing best practices into our structure? And then beyond that, it's just a matter of, being, walking the talk that's being spewed. We see many organizations that have made beautiful statements around wanting to have an optimal culture, wanting to be inclusive. And as we all know, especially here in the US, we're a place of cancel culture, right? And so it's very hard for you to make a statement and not have the accountability. And so if you don't want to have the customers take matters into their own hands and say, we don't see we're not seeing what you're speaking, what you're putting out there, therefore we're going to take our business elsewhere. If you don't want those types of repercussions, which I would assume most leaders don't, then they have to start addressing. So I would just advise, pound with the facts and with the education pieces of business impact, so that you're not trying to sell them on, like Andrew said, just the feel good part of this, but genuinely the value of the bottom line impact.
And with regard to that, I know it's a slightly circular argument, but one of the real benefits of doing a targeted culture survey like Culture Quest is that it gives you that evidence base.
Yeah.
Particularly in areas like diversity and inclusion, there's a lot of theorizing. There's a lot of academic research out there, which is, not directly applicable to organizations. And there's a lot of debate, quite rightly. But as soon as you start gathering real, objective, detailed evidence from your own employees, that kills a lot of the discussions stone dead, and a lot of the objections stone dead, because you have that evidence and you can go, this is what our people are saying.
Yeah.
And when you do that, that's extremely powerful. And actually, in terms of getting D&I and culture a place at that top table, that's a great tool to be starting to having those more influential conversations with your leadership.
Yes. So we did some research a year or two ago and found that using tools that automate the collection, right, that help you to segment the data, to help you see different types of populations, different audiences, different demographics in the organization, being able to see all of those different layers, that is so much more effective at giving you better insights to decide what to do next than having just, I'm going to put together my own little, yes, you can do a Google form for free and you can send that out there, but the questions won't be validated, right? You won't be able to analyze the data. Most HR people that I know are not extremely capable at analyzing data and understanding what's significant, what isn't. So having some of those tools in place, not just gives you the framework, but it gives you some of those other kinds of things that enable that to actually have an impact in the day, not just another survey, not just another HR initiative that's never going to see the light of day, but it leads to real change in the actual business.
The other thing is, lots of organizations invest a great deal of money in initiatives, be they around in the D&I space, for example, unconscious bias training or leadership development programs, whatever it happens to be, and then really don't have a great idea of what the return on their investment actually is. So they don't track the impact of those can be very time consuming and expensive initiatives on their experience and on their culture. And to do that, you really should be tracking the impact of these things. And to have an assessment like this really allows you to do that.
Right.
So we got a thank you from Somi in the comments. So I'm glad that was helpful for you. She said to both of you by name, appreciate you for your help.
There's no simple answer to your question. I wish I could wave a magic wand and help you, but
yeah,
I knew it would be I'm glad you're here, so I could hand that question off to you and just sit back and let you both address it. But you both did a good job on it. You both gave some good insights there that will help her. And again, anyone else that's listening in, there's more than one company out there that has autocratic leaders that think they know it all and they think they make all the decisions. So that's a common problem, and hopefully that'll address that for those people that need it. So if someone wants to learn more about Culture Quest, and we're about to wrap up here, what's the best way for someone to get in touch, Megan?
The best thing to do would be to go to our website, go to questback.com. That's questback.com. And right there, you'll see many of options and buttons as far as requesting demos, requesting further information, or if you'd like to just learn more about our Culture Quest offering. And our team would be happy to schedule time to meet with you, talk through your current challenges, and help facilitate change and transformation for your organization.
Wonderful. Andrew, Megan, thank you both for your time, for your
Thank you so much,
your
Ben.
insights. Both
Thanks,
of you are
Ben.
incredibly sharp, and I appreciate you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Wonderful. All right. To everybody else, I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Goodness, they're incredible. They're sharp. We got some great insights on culture. I have, for a long time, been just a culture junkie, for lack of a better term. Just love talking about it, love investigating what leads to great culture. And there's so much data. We didn't have time to even get into that today, but there's so much evidence that shows that having the right culture in place, having a strong culture, having a well-defined culture doesn't just lead to people being happy, but it leads to business impacts, can lead to profitability and those metrics that your leaders do care about. So dig into that, bring some of the data if you have to. Thank you so much for joining us on HR Tech Talk today. We're taking off next week in honor of Martin Luther King Day. So take a moment, share an encouraging word with someone else in the spirit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we'll catch you the following week with a new episode of HR Tech Talks. Thank you so much. Thank you for what you do. Go out there and be great.